The definitive film account of the world-shattering events of 1914 to 18. The Great War on BBC4 Now, Episode 9.
The year 1915 came in with sleet and mud. In the brief pause of winter, the motionless armies of both sides waited. The British government surveyed the ruin of the war's early hopes and took stock of the future. Grave doubts now replaced the first bright optimism. Powerful minds applied themselves to strategy and tactics. Was the deadlock of the Western Front permanent? Could it be broken? Would the French spring offensive succeed in thrusting the Germans back? There were those who doubted. Lord Kitchener was one.
The German lines in France may be looked on as a fortress that cannot be completely invested, with the result that the lines may be held by an investing force, whilst operations proceed elsewhere.
Operations elsewhere. But where? The Baltic? The Mediterranean? In the first days of August 1914, the German cruiser Breslau and the new fast battle cruiser Goeben had been in the Mediterranean. 16 British warships closed in on them. To escape capture, the German vessels raced towards Turkey, a neutral state, but a neutral with pro-German sympathies. Germany offered the two ships to the Turkish Navy. Their commander became a Turkish admiral. Already the chief of staff of Turkey's army was a German, with another German general in charge of training. Under a figurehead sultan, Turkey was ruled by Enver Pasha. His power was absolute, but dependent on German support. His ambitions were grandiose. In October 1914, Enver Pasha had permitted the Goeben and the Breslau to enter the Black Sea to shell Russian ports and sink every ship in their path. By the 30th of October, Turkey was at war with the Allied powers. The British War Council considered the possibilities of a naval attack on the Dardanelles. Here, the prizes of success seemed glittering indeed. Egypt and the Suez Canal would be secured. Italy and the Balkan states would be induced to join the Allies. Russia would be able to import munitions from the Western Allies and America. And Russia's huge stores of grain, bottled up in the Black Sea ports, would be released. It was indeed an attractive project. On January the 14th, 1915, the British War Council's mind was made up.
The Admiralty should prepare for a naval expedition in February to bombard and take the Gallipoli Peninsula, with Constantinople as its objective.
A naval attack opened on the 18th of February, 1915. For the next 2 weeks, the British and French fleet attempted to destroy the forts guarding the Dardanelles. Hampered by bad weather, they still made useful progress. Marines and bluejackets went ashore, blew up abandoned guns, and wrecked Turkish emplacements. met only light opposition. The task seemed easy.
The greatest satisfaction was expressed at the Admiralty, and I found myself in these days surrounded by smiling faces.
Unexpected difficulties now arose. Forts, apparently silenced, came to life again. New Turkish guns appeared. Minefields impeded the Allied battleships. The unarmed trawlers trying to sweep the mines were driven off by gunfire. Doubts about the Navy's ability to finish the job alone began to grow. In London, Lord Fisher, First Sea Lord, said,
"The Dardanelles, futile without soldiers. Someone will have to land at Gallipoli some time or other."
but where were the soldiers to be found? Lord Kitchener, weighing the demands of the Western Front, faced a difficult decision. There were troops in Egypt, the Anzacs, the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, Indians, British territorials. Half-trained, ill-equipped, they were not yet an army. Something more had to be added, a regular division. There was only one left, the 29th, and it was already promised to the Western Front. Reluctantly, Kitchener agreed to release the 29th to Gallipoli. The French government also offered a division. That made 70,000 men ready for action. As Commander-in-Chief, Kitchener appointed his friend Sir Ian Hamilton, a general of great distinction, for whom the war had not yet found a role. Kitchener told him,
"We are sending a military force to support the fleet now at the Dardanelles, and you are to have command. If the fleet gets through, Constantinople will fall of itself, and you will have won not a battle, but the war."
On the 18th of March, Hamilton watched the Navy deliver its final assault on the Narrows, a strip of water 8 miles long, sometimes less than a mile wide, which was the gateway to Constantinople. Early afternoon, and all was going well. Suddenly, the French battleship Bouvet blew up with an immense explosion and vanished within 2 minutes, taking with her nearly 700 men. By the end of the day, 3 Allied battleships had gone down. 3 more were severely damaged by mines and gunfire. The action was called off. The fleet retired from the straits. The Turkish gunners, down to their last few rounds of ammunition, waited for the fleet to return. In Constantinople, the government prepared to abandon the capital. And then, as the days passed and the Allies failed to appear, a fierce exultation seized the Turks. Enver Pasha crowed with confidence.
"I shall go down in history as the man who demonstrated the vulnerability of the British fleet."
Now Turkish blood was up, and the Turks turned in a fury of revenge on the aliens in their midst, the Armenians. There were 2 million Armenians in Turkey, Christians in a Muslim country. Christians, furthermore, whose homeland lay partly in Turkey, partly in Russia. Potential traitors in Turkish eyes, and tribal enemies for centuries past. In the weeks that followed, 750,000 Armenians, men, women, and children, were savagely exterminated. Said Turkish Minister Talat Bay,
The place we have sent them to is nowhere. No Armenian can be our friend after what we have done to them.
While this killing went on, reports of an Allied military expedition forming in Egypt poured into Constantinople. Enver Pasha turned over command of the Gallipoli Peninsula to the German Liman von Sanders. Von Sanders had 6 Turkish divisions, not enough to cover the whole coastline of the Dardanelles, but he placed them cleverly to concentrate against any dangerous landing. A crash program of training, road building, and defense works followed. Time was precious. The Turks worked and waited. But no one came. Back in Egypt, the new expeditionary force struggled against disorganization and muddle. Everything had to be improvised. In the intervals of work and training, Egypt offered its diversions. Spirits were high. The war was young and new for these happy warriors. Hamilton decided to confront von Sanders with 6 simultaneous landings. At the same time, 2 diversions would add to the Turks' confusion. The French would land on the Asiatic shore and then withdraw. And a mock assault would be made on the neck of the peninsula at Bular by the Navy. The moment drew near. The excitement of the adventure ahead seized the minds of men. Rupert Brooke, the poet turned soldier, expressed the universal feeling.
I suddenly realized that the ambition of my life has been to go on a military expedition against Constantinople. Oh, God, I've never been so happy, I think. Like a stream flowing entirely to one end.
But Brooke fell sick and died before the expedition sailed. As the great armada pulled away amid a tumult of cheering from the troop ships towards the battlefields of classical antiquity and the Golden Horn beyond, Sir Ian Hamilton wrote in his diary,
Almighty God, watchman of the Milky Way, shepherd of the golden stars, have mercy upon us, smallest of the heavenly shiners. Our star burns dim as a corpse light. The huge black chasm of space closes in. If only by blood, thy will be done. En avant, at all costs. En avant.
The first landings were at Gaba Tepe, where the peninsula narrowed to a bare 4 miles. At 4 a.m. on April the 25th, the boats cast off from warships and troopships, bearing their loads of soldiers towards the dark and hostile shore. For these men, more than all others, this was a culminating moment. These were the Anzacs, entering their first battle, determined to make a name. From the gentle pastures of New Zealand, the turmoil of Sydney, the dignity of Melbourne, the wide spaces of Queensland and the West, they had come not just to fight the Turks, but to lodge their youthful nations in the great affairs of the world.
It was pitch dark. Then all of a sudden, a dim outline of the coast loomed up. As we got closer, we were all getting tensed up now and nervous, wondering what was going to happen as everything was so quiet. Then a single shot rang out, and a yellowish light flared up in the sky. From then, everything was let loose. Machine gun and rifle fire directed at the boats. The pinnaces cast us off. The muffled oarsmen took up the row. We were rowed ashore. As soon as the boats grounded, it was every man for himself. It was out. As we scrambled ashore, those were lucky enough to get there, we found what cover under the cliff we could. As we lay there for a few moments, gathering our wind, we slipped off our pack, fixed our bayonets, and someone in the crowd, there was no officer, no one in charge. The order was, right lads, after the bastards.
5 o'clock that morning, Leman von Sanders was roused with a series of alarming reports. The Allies had arrived. Von Sanders galloped off to Bular. There he remained all day, waiting for the landing that never came. The first diversion was a complete success. So was the second. The French landed easily on the Asiatic coast and took 500 prisoners before they withdrew. Opposite the French at S Beach, the landing was also successful. At Y Beach, on the further flank, 2,000 men went ashore without a casualty. But they did not press inland. At W Beach, the Lancashire Fusiliers fought their way ashore through dense barbed wire under a murderous fire, giving their name to this battlefield, Lancashire Landing. By evening, they had linked up with the men at X Beach, further north. But the high drama of the day was elsewhere. At 6 a.m. on the 25th of April, the naval bombardment lifted over V Beach, and a floating Trojan horse neared the tip of Cape Helles. In broad daylight, the collier SS River Clyde, with 2,000 troops aboard, grounded herself gently offshore. Doors opened in her side, ramps came down. Dublin and Munster Fusiliers poured forth. Seconds later, 20 small boats loaded with more Fusiliers scraped the sand beside her. It was very quiet. But the Turks were ready.
Well, they opened up on the shore. And they was firing not only machine guns, rifle fire, they had these nice little pom-pom shells, all nice painted colours, beautiful things. And they was hitting off at the side of the ship and ripping the people to pieces. And even the bullets, if they missed you, was hitting the ship and going and tearing pieces out of them.
3.5 hours later, barely 200 men were ashore, and these were trapped in a small area of safety beneath a low sandbank. The brigadier was dead. The survivors crouched behind the plates of the River Clyde and waited for nightfall. Flying overhead, an Allied airman looked down and reported the water was absolutely red with blood. V Beach had been a catastrophe. Not until the following day, after bitter fighting, did the British capture this beach. To the north, the dawn of the first day found isolated groups of Anzacs chasing a fleeing enemy.
By 8 o'clock time, we were well advanced, I should say, somewhere between a mile and a half. And later in the morning, we got well across the peninsula and we could see the coast of the Narrows.
But now a Turkish colonel arrived on the slopes of Saray Bayah. His name was Mustafa Kemal. Kemal realized at once that this ridge was the key to the whole southern half of the peninsula, that the enemy must be driven off it. He rallied the retreating Turks and sent for reinforcements. His orders were uncompromising.
I don't order you to attack. I order you to die.
The Anzacs were forced off the ridge. By the end of the day, 15,000 men were crowding into the Anzac bridgehead, 2 miles long by 3/4 of a mile deep. On a narrow beach, barely 1,000 yards long and 30 yards wide, supplies and equipment piled up. Down from the cliffs came the wounded, choking the incoming traffic.
It was about the most precarious position a bloke could find himself in. You sort of made up your mind, well, we're here, and the only way he can get us off now is by carrying us off feet first.
Altogether, there were 30,000 men ashore on Gallipoli. Casualties had been heavy, but that was expected. More serious was the fact that none of the main landings had achieved their objectives. Now everyone stood by for the Turkish counterattacks against those frail footholds of the Allies. Hamilton told his men,
You have got through the difficult business. Now you only have to dig, dig, dig until you are safe.
And so they dug, and the Turks dug too. During the pause that followed, Britain and her allies took stock of what they had done. Questions and doubts sprang into men's minds. With dismay, Kitchener and the government recognized that the enterprise which was meant to resolve the stalemate of the war had only, in fact, produced another affront and another stalemate. Waves of consternation spread. The foundations of the government itself began to tremble. At Gallipoli, the battle flared up again. On the 18th of May, the Turks, outnumbering the Dominion troops by 3 to 1, tried to wipe out the Anzac bridgehead.
They came over in 2 great waves from their trenches, in great hulking mass, in which they were rather big men, the Turks, fine body of men. As they came over in 2 great waves, they were shouting "Hallo," and blowing their trumpets and whistling and shouting, schoolboys. As they got closer, within nice rifle range, we had the order to fire. We opened fire with rapid fire and brought them down in hundreds. Hundreds of them fell. And in front of our trench, I should think, when the attack was over, there would be anything to 2,000 to 3,000 dead and dying in front of our brigade. They were lying there, and for about 3 or 4 days, the smell got so awful. We prayed that the wind would blow in from the sea and take the stench of the dead over into the Turkish trenches instead of blowing it to our own, as the stench got so awful at that time.
For both sides, infection and disease were now the dangers. A frontline armistice was arranged. Anzacs and Turks worked together to bury the dead in large communal graves.
I wasn't one of those burying the dead, but I sat on the parapet and after a walked over and offered bully beef to one Turk, and he smiled and seemed very pleased and passed me a whole string, 2 strings of dates, I think it was.
3 weeks after the landings, Hamilton launched a major attack from Cape Helles to take the first day's objectives, the village of Krithia and the high ridge of Ashi Baba. The attack failed. By the end of May, Hamilton's British casualties alone totaled 38,000 men, and he cabled London for more troops, more ammunition. Touring the Anzac bridgehead at that time, Hamilton saw
men staggering under huge sides of frozen beef. Men struggling up cliffs with kerosene tins full of water. Men digging, men cooking. Men card-playing in small dens scooped out from the banks of yellow clay. Everyone wore a bank holiday air. Evidently, the ranklings and worries of mankind, miseries and concerns of the spirit, had fled the precincts of this valley. The boss, the bill, the girl, envy, malice, hunger, hatred, had scooted away to the Antipodes.
But there was another side to the picture, and Hamilton saw that too.
All the time, from that fiery crest line, there comes a slow, constant trickle of wounded. Some dragging themselves painfully along, others being carried along on stretchers. Bomb wounds all. A ceaseless, silent stream of bandages and blood. Yet 3 out of 4 of the boys have grit left for a gay smile or a cheery little nod to their comrades, waiting for their turn as they pass down on their way to the sea.
The ding-dong struggle continued all through June and July. By the 1st of August, each side had lost 57,000 killed and wounded. Each battle held its nightmare of shadeless heat and dust and death. Soon, a cynical prayer was passed along the front line. Please God, send us a victory, but not in our sector. The smell of death thickened in the blinding sun, and the strain of living from day to day under the eyes of the enemy took its effect.
During the day, we could see the vultures heading down toward the bodies of both Turks and our own men. And occasionally we would take a pot shot at them to try and keep them off, particularly if we thought there was somebody wounded out in front. But we couldn't fire too much at them for fear of giving away our own position, because the Turks seemed to have very good observation posts and were able to see practically everything that we did.
Water was very scarce, and when the summer came, of course it brought the disease and the flies with it. The rations, of course, was nothing only bully beef and apricot jam. And when we did get the summer, the jam was a regular issue, nothing else but apricot. When you opened that, it was almost like water. You couldn't put it on your biscuit or anything like that. It was just a matter of pouring it on. And before you could get that to your mouth, it was absolutely, well, literally covered with flies. It was a case of holding it with dropping the tin and holding one biscuit with one hand and waving the flies off with the other all the time.
Lethargy settled over the beaches between the battles. 1,000 men a week were going down with dysentery.
It was a very weakening thing. We walked about after a time like skeletons, finding it difficult even to move at times. And of course, when one was out of the line, there were heavy things to lift. On fatigue, like water carrying and helping to dig roads and so on. It was as much as we could do to lift the tool or whatever it was that we were carrying.
In faraway London, the ripples of Gallipoli made themselves felt. Lord Fisher resigned, and the Conservatives insisted that Churchill should go too. The shell shortage persisted. The Liberal government fell. And all the time, the campaign in Gallipoli drew in more troops, more ammunition needed on the Western Front. The War Council agreed that Hamilton could have 5 more divisions ready for action by the end of July. But by then, the equivalent of 10 new Turkish divisions had dug in and were waiting. The ripples of Gallipoli touched more than politics. They touched the hearts of men and worked their changes on human nature itself. To the Allied soldiers fighting on the peninsula, the Turks displayed not only fanatical bravery, but surprising chivalry too. The half-affectionate nickname, Johnny Turk, was born.
The Turkish soldier was very highly regarded by me and all the men on our side. He was always a clean fighter and one of the most courageous men in the world. When they came, there was no beating about it, but they faced up to the heaviest rifle fire that you could put up, and nothing would stop them. They were almost fanatical. We came to the conclusion that he was a very good bloke indeed. We had a lot of time for him.
The British virtues also revealed themselves. The extraordinary talent for improvisation, for making a harbour on an open shore, making bombs out of jam tins. Turning a hole in a gully into a little bit of a home, making a barrage without enough guns or shells. And the British also revealed their traditional stubbornness in defeat. But there was a sense of sickening disappointment. The failure of the Navy could not be disguised. When German submarines entered the Mediterranean and sank 2 battleships, the rest of these great vessels scurried for safety to their harbours. As they steamed away, they took with them most of the hope that was left. The glittering prize of Constantinople began to fade away. Ian Hamilton had one last shot in his locker. One more flanking attack up the peninsula, another landing. More reinforcements arrived, including 3 divisions of Kitchener's new army. They possessed the virtues and the faults of this great volunteer force. Its eagerness, its devotion, its lack of training, its ardent young soldiers, and its elderly generals. On August the 6th, the new army divisions landed at Suvla Bay in front of a dried-up salt lake. The
It was a complete surprise. The way across the peninsula was open. But the untrained soldiers and their bewildered leaders failed to push on. Hundreds brewed tea and bathed on the beaches while the vital hours slipped away. On their right, the Anzacs were waging their bitterest battle, Lone Pine. The fighting went on for 2 days. At the end of it, the Turks still held the commanding heights of Surrey Bare. And this meant that the British New Army divisions could not advance either, even when they found out what to do and where to go. Muddle and mischance had prevailed again. The expedition was still blocked. This was the end of hope. Ian Hamilton wrote,
"An ugly dream came to me last night. I was being drowned, held violently under the Hellespont. For hours afterwards, I was haunted by the thought that the Dardanelles were fatal, that something sinister was afoot, that we, all of us, were predoomed."
Yet for weary months, the armies stayed. It was trench warfare now. Barbed wire, snipers, machine guns, boredom. Like France, yet not like France. Gallipoli was much further away. No one who went there ever came home on leave. From Dover to Calais, 22 miles. From Dover to Cape Helles, 3,000 miles. On Gallipoli, in 37 weeks, 31,000 Allied soldiers were killed, 73,000 were wounded, 93,000 went sick. For the wounded and sick, there were the fly-blown casualty clearing stations. Then the hospital ships, perhaps just to Egypt, with luck, if you survived the journey, all the way back to England. In September, in one Anzac battalion, 78% were suffering from dysentery, 5% from weak hearts. Men developed a sharp appetite for the smaller things. Bathing in the sea became an inexpressible joy. To get away from the flies, wash off the dirt and dust, to feel cool again. One said, in some ways, it was a curiously happy time. In October, Ian Hamilton was recalled. His successor, General Munro, arriving from the Western Front, toured the beaches and came to a swift decision. The peninsula must be evacuated. Winston Churchill said,
"He came, he saw, he capitulated."
But there was no escaping facts. Kitchener went out to Gallipoli to see for himself. His conclusion was,
"Well, I've seen the place. It's an awful place, and you'll never get through."
So the bitter decision was reached. Evacuation. But Gallipoli had one last extraordinary trick to play on the defeated Allies. After all the miseries of heat and flies and diarrhea, a blizzard in November put 15,000 men out of action with frostbite. It was the worst storm for 40 years. And now they came to the last act on Gallipoli. 120,000 men, thousands of animals, hundreds of guns. What would become of them all? The evacuation plan was a masterpiece. Ironic success in the midst of utter failure. Every possible ruse was employed to persuade the Turks that things were normal. Troops bathed and played games. Reliefs and ration parties went on with empty boxes. Automatic devices fired rifles sporadically along the emptying trenches. Then, with sacking round their boots to dull the sound, the soldiers came away. The Australian General Monash described their departure from Suvla.
Down dozens of little gullies leading back from the front lines came groups of 6 to a dozen men, the last closing the gully with a frame of barbed wire. All these little columns of men kept joining up like so many rivulets which flow into the main stream, east or running, just a steady, silent tramp in single file, without any lights or smoking. And every yard brought us nearer safety.
83,000 men were taken off from Suvla and Anzac in December without a casualty. In January, the whole performance was repeated at Cape Helles.
The tears were streaming down my cheeks. I just couldn't restrain them. My eyes were smarting. I think I walked for the rest of the way with my eyes closed. I knew it so well, and I couldn't go short. I was in a trench. As we got further from the line, near an back-house post, I remembered the advance we had on May the 6th, when more of my pals picked up as a Warren, young Yates. I could even hear young Orton crying for his mother as he died. I remember Colonel Quilter, great big chap, straight as a poker, guards officer. I remember him leading the advance and going to his death, armed with a huge walking stick. He told us before we landed, when we were on the boat, that the eyes of the world would be upon us. Well, the eyes of the Turks certainly were. And so were their rifles. But the rest of the world seemed to have forgot us.
And another said, as he set off towards the boats, I hope they won't hear us going down to the beaches. On the beaches, the last stores blazed, the ammunition exploded. The great adventure was over. The war went on, mounting to new ferocity. No rest for the gaunt survivors. Rest only for the unforgotten dead.